Rethinking Pen Testing breakout session. Our presenter today is Mike Saunders. He is a principal consultant for Red Siege. Mike has 25 years of IT and security expertise working in ISP banking, insurance, ag businesses. He's an experienced international speaker with notable cybersecurity talks at conferences such as DerbyCon, Circle CityCon, and NorSec. Mike is the lead red team operator for Red Siege Information Security. I'm going to bring Mike on up. If you do have questions, please raise your hand so I can get the mic to you so that our viewers off remotely can get those same questions and hear your question. Mike, take it away, sir.
All right. Thank you, sir. I am Mike Saunders, principal consultant with Red Siege. I want to talk to you about rethinking pen testing. This is me. I've done some stuff. When I'm not at computers, I try to be as far away as possible. So if you follow me on social media, you'll see that it's a lot of like fishing and nature pictures, which is my happy place. So enough about me. Why am I here? I do want to tell you that this is not a technical talk. So if you're here for the latest tools and techniques and that's not what this talk is about. This talk is about, I think that pen testing is broken. And what do I mean by pen testing is broken? So pen testing, traditional pen testing model, I'll say that, the traditional network pen test where an attacker comes into your network, or an attacker, me, a consultant comes into your network. We drop a Kali box or some type of image on your network, and then we run a vulnerability scan, a discovery scan. We start lobbing exploits at whatever vulnerable services are there. We're making a bunch of noise. There is value in doing those tests. Don't get me wrong, there's 100% value on doing those tests. But attackers aren't doing that. Attackers aren't setting up a Kali box, hopefully, on inside your network, right? They're coming in from the outside, they're phishing your users, they're popping some vulnerable service that's on your perimeter and then burrowing into your network and depending on the attacker, some of them are trying to blend in, some of them are trying to be smash and grab, and they're a lot of noise, but they're not testing from that position. There is definite value in doing those tests. However, it's not how attackers are really operating. And I think that there are better ways that we can do tests for our clients. Now, I'm a consultant. I do penetration testing, assume breach testing, red team testing. So I'm here to give you my perspective on what I think is a better way for most clients and give you kind of the pros and cons of some of the different approaches that we can go with. So back with the network pen testing, on the positive side, of all the testing I'm going to talk about, this is the most likely to find actual like software vulnerabilities that need to be patched. You've got remotely exploitable whatever service on your network. Network pen test will find those. Assume breach doesn't usually find those because it's not how it operates. It's not that kind of test. Red teams might find it, especially from outside in, like if it's something on your perimeter. But once they're inside your network, we're generally not trying to run exploits unless we absolutely have to. We're just trying to abuse the way things work so that we blend in more. So how might a real attacker operate? We can find that out doing things like assume breach, red teaming, purple teaming. And I want to talk to you about what these different terms mean and try to give you some clarity, because you'll hear people say red teaming. What does that mean? To some people, that means just doing a standard network pen test or web app pen test even. To some people, a red team is a very advanced type of test. It's adversarial threat emulation, adversary emulation, adversary simulation, threat simulation. There's all these different terms that kind of overlap. And I grabbed all of these terms by just going out and Googling a bunch of companies that do penetration testing. And I looked for the more advanced offering and what were the terms they used. And these were all terms that were used to describe either red teaming, assume breach testing, and or purple teaming. So there's a lot of confusion. And we see that with our clients. Clients come to us and say, we want a red team. It's like, what does that mean to you? Help me understand what that means to you, and it's all across the board. So I want to give you some common language, hopefully, to help you as a consumer to understand the differences between them. And if you are someone who is a consultant, give you some things that you can use to discuss with your clients to help them be better informed and ultimately arrive at the right solution. So with a red team, some of the things that we might call a red team would be attack simulation, adversarial attack, threat emulation, red teaming, we might say that, comprehensive testing. But what is a red team? A red team is a more advanced type of test that's designed to emulate an advanced threat actor. The way that we get in on a red team varies depending on what the scenario is. We might phish our way in. We might do social engineering, vishing, calling someone on the phone, getting them to do something. The new term now, quishing, QR code phishing. So, what's the next ishing thing? I don't know, but quishing right now. Once we get access into a network, in a red team, you're generally trying to evade detection. Trying to get persistence on a machine, meaning if someone reboots their machine and they log back in, we get our connection back. So we want persistence. We want to be able to evade detection. We want to be able to move laterally through the network, escalate privileges, and we want to get to a goal. On a red team, they're almost always and should always be goal-focused. Not just, hey, can you smash and grab? Clients will say, we want you to get into this particular DMZ or this particular database server. We want you to steal this particular kind of data. We need you to compromise these specific systems. Like that is the goal. It's goal-focused versus just generic, find as many vulnerabilities as you can, because red teams aren't about finding vulnerabilities. A red team assessment is about testing people. It's about testing your defenders in their ability to identify attackers and eradicate attackers from the network. So if I am your red team actor and I am attacking you, I'm going to try to get in. I'm going to try to establish persistence, and I'm probably going to have multiple means of communication. So I have the actively attacking command and control network, and my persistence channel is calling out through a different mechanism. It's calling back to a different website. It's using a different protocol. It's something that's not part of my main operating thing. So hopefully it's harder for you to detect. And if you do kick me out of your network, then if I have persistence, I can reactivate my connection. Now I'm operating in your network again. Can you figure out where that came from? That's what a red team is about. It's about testing defenders, not really testing defenses. So one of the things, though, when it comes to red teams is people think that we can just do a really fast red team. It's not. Red teams take a lot of research. It takes a lot of time. So like, oh, you sent a phishing message, you got in, did whatever. Well, yes, but we had to do a lot of research to get to the point that we could even send you the phishing message. We had to figure out who you were. Were you the right people? Were you the right target to send the phishing message to? What kind of EDR do you have? What type of web proxy do you have? What type of firewall even? Are you using OpenDNS? Because OpenDNS and their DNS classification protocols might detect RC2 networks. So we need to figure out, make sure our domain's classified correctly. So there's a ton of research that's involved in red teaming before we ever actually start sending packets to you. And that research makes these tests expensive. Like on a 3-week test, and I wouldn't do any red team that's less than 3 weeks, and 3 weeks is a really short period. The first week is all research. Like it's all research, just trying to figure out who the target is and what are possible scenarios that we might get in. We also, when we do these tests, they cost a lot of money, so that's a con, right? Because there's a lot of research that's involved. An attacker has unlimited amount of time, essentially. We only have a short period of time that's within our contract. So if we don't find it, maybe you're good. Like I'm in the middle, on the tail end of a red team right now, and we've tried like 5 different phishing campaigns and a couple other things, and we haven't gotten in yet. Like we've tried, and this company has done a really good job of defending those attacks. So hopefully Jason, my social engineering wizard, is on the phone calling people and he's getting in today because he's really good at that. But like the phishing side, they've been beating us up. And this campaign's gonna get over if we don't have access. Like we have to couch our recommendations or our report and like we only had a limited amount of time. Just because we don't have these findings for you doesn't mean that a real attacker with unlimited amount of time won't actually get in. Like we always try to preface that because we've got limited amount of time. On the plus side for a red team, you have a better understanding of how you will fare in a real world attack. Like if an attacker does get in, if we do get into the network and we're able to start operating, can you detect us? If you did detect us, can you eradicate me? I was on a test recently where the clients, they did detect me eventually when I made enough noise, and they disabled the account that I was using. But they didn't terminate the VPN access. So I still had access to the network, and they never logged me out of the laptop that I was using. So I still had, even though my account was locked, I still had a valid login session. I could still talk to Active Directory and see that my account was disabled. And I had VPN access, and I happened to have some administrator credentials that I had already compromised. So I just re-enabled my account and continued on the test. So real world testing. Hey guys, you've got a problem with your incident response process because you didn't terminate VPN access. That was a takeaway that they had. So you get to understand how things work in the real world. The downside is that red teams are like threading multiple needles. People are like, oh, you just got to thread the needle. You got to get the phishing payload in and get someone to click on it. And the reality is that there's so many needles that we have to thread in a red team. So first, we have to protect our infrastructure because I've got my phishing infrastructure. I've got a landing page that I want you to come to and enter your credentials into or download my payload from. There are sites like Netcraft, or services like Netcraft. Netcraft is going around scanning the entire world looking for things, and they have clients like Microsoft. So if I'm doing a Microsoft 365 login page for a phishing campaign, if I do not protect my infrastructure, if I do not shun Netcraft from scanning my site, Netcraft sees my site, sees, hey, that's a Microsoft 365 logon page, but you're not Microsoft. Something's fishy here. And they report that to Microsoft, and they also issue a domain takedown notice. And then the work that I put in to building that domain, getting that domain categorized, all of that work that I did ahead of time is now burned. And I know that because I've done that, like had a failure in my rule set to protect my infrastructure. And Netcraft burned it in the middle of a campaign. I was like, well, back to the drawing board. So we got to protect our infrastructure. We've got to get past email filters before we ever get to a human. So maybe we got to go through Proofpoint or Mimecast, or we've got to get into M365's mail filtering, and they're pretty good at detecting spam and phishing campaigns sometimes. Then I have to get the right ruse to the right user on the right day. So what does that mean? Like if I want to attack you, so I want to attack Ethan here, and Ethan's having a good day. He's not stressed. He's not, the world's not on fire. He's just having a pretty average day. He gets my phishing email. That looks suspect. I'm going to report that. But if I email you and you're in the middle of having some personal life happening, or maybe work is just terrible, things are on fire at work and everyone is running around crazy, you're maybe not going to pay as much attention to the email. And maybe you're a little more likely to click if I've done the research to make sure I've targeted you with the right campaign, but I have to hit you on the right day. And that's part of the problem. We have to get the right ruse to the right user on the right day. And maybe if I had emailed someone tomorrow, they would have clicked on my campaign, but today they're having a great day and they're like, nah, I'm not falling for that. So we've got to get past that. If we can get past the human boundary, I now have to figure out what EDR do you have What type of AV or EDR do you have, and how do I get around it? And if I don't know that, I have to take a shot in the dark and hope that maybe I have something to get around it. How do I know what's on there? I got to do a lot of research. On the current client, I was doing some research. I actually found an SEC filing where this company was acquiring this other company, and there was a service agreement in there about what services were going to be provided. And it said, Company A is going to provide target company with CrowdStrike and all these other things. So I knew that, like, oh, they're running Falcon. Great, that's what I have to write for a payload bypass. Once I get my code execution, I have to execute code without being seen, and I have to stay hidden. So there's a lot of needles that I have to thread just to get this test going. What's a better way? Well, we could say, let's do an assume breach. Let's assume that all of that stuff has happened. Now let's just start the attack on what we assume to be a compromised endpoint. We're going to have to do the same things. I have to be able to get code execution and move laterally and, depending on the type of assume breach, not get caught. But I don't have to get through that initial layer of getting initial access. I just have to stay hidden on an endpoint. That's like a zero knowledge, more red team assumed breach. But we could also do a full knowledge test. Everyone knows we're there. We're not trying to hide. The focus on those tests is all about coverage. What are all the things that we can find? Where are all the places we can go? What are all the issues that we can report in the amount of time that we have? Neither approach is right. Like, it's what are your goals, and then we'll do the approach that's right for you. I can't tell you which one's right for you without talking to you about your goals. These tests typically start on what I would call a typical end user workstation with typical end user account. So if I want to model what happens to Joe in accounting when Joe gets phished, I should probably have a machine that Joe has, the same kind of machine with the same software installed. For example, I was doing a test for a company that had IBM Lotus Notes, and Lotus Notes had a local privilege escalation vulnerability in the version they had installed. So I was able to escalate my privileges on that workstation and then have complete ownership of that workstation, at which point I could steal the credentials from the vulnerability scanning software that manages the endpoint. I was able to get those credentials from memory, and then I was able to escalate privileges in the network. If I didn't get a machine that had Lotus Notes on it because they just gave me, hey, here's a Windows 10 workstation with none of our software installed, I wouldn't have found that vulnerability, at which point I would never be able to report it to the client. So it's important to have the exact kind of machine that the user would have. If Joe's in accounting, I should have the exact same kind of account that Joe has with the exact same group membership. Ideally, we do all of this with a recently terminated user account. Someone's left the company, keep their machine, keep their account, make it inactive for the time being, and then give that machine an account to your consultant to do the test, because that's something real world. Because there's all this cruft that happens with real world accounts. Because as much as we want to say that our imaging processes are good and our deployment processes are good, you never have all the right group membership out of the gate. You never have all the right software installed, because managing IT is a moving target. So there's these things that aren't in the gold image that happen in the real world that may be a point of compromise for you, or a point of attack that you didn't have because your gold image didn't have that. So when we do an assume breach, the goal usually is focusing on overt testing. We're not trying to evade. We're just trying to find as many things as possible, so we don't need to worry about being quiet. But you may also want to focus on, can we detect someone, doing a more red team themed assume breach. So in that case, only like 1 or 2 people in the company know we're there. They ship us a laptop, and we start the test on that laptop. And we're trying to get code execution and do all the things that we need to do without getting caught, and hopefully evade detection. And then C, do the incident responders detect us? And then can they figure out what's going on, and can they eradicate us from the network? For an assume breach, the pros are pretty similar to the red team. We can model real world tactics, and you get a better understanding of how you're gonna fare against a real world attacker. On the downside, we've got a limited period of time, and these assume breach are not as long as red teams are usually. Like they're shorter. As a result, we have a more limited amount of time, which means we need to operate faster if we want to cover a lot of ground. And by covering a lot of ground and moving faster, we're making more noise. And when we're making more noise, it's harder for us to evade. So it's not realistic to say, hey, we've got this huge network, and we want you to do a 1-week assumed breach, and we want you to compromise the entire network, but we want you to avoid detection. It's like, okay, well, we've got 3 options here. Let's pick 2. Like, do you want it thorough and long, or fast? You know, like, how do you want this set up? And so we have to make some compromises because we don't have an unlimited amount of time. Just like the red team, we're not really focused on vulnerabilities in here. And when I say vulnerabilities, you've got Apache 2 point whatever that has a remote code execution vulnerability. Vulnerability scan is going to find that. A traditional network pen test is going to see that. We're not looking for that. The only reason I'm going to go looking for a vulnerability like that is if I'm having trouble escalating privileges or getting persistence, and that mechanism would be valuable to me. But a lot of the times the exploits are noisy and they're counterproductive to what I'm trying to do as an attacker and stay hidden. I talked about the importance of representative accounts and workstations. So if you want to hamstring your tester, you're looking to just get a checkbox, give them a machine that doesn't have any of your software on it, and a user account that's only a member of domain users. Like, I've had people do that. I still won. It was tough, but you know, I should say that it's not a competition. I'm not here to win, right? Like, but when they do that, you're like, come on, guys, come on. You know, ultimately, we're here to make sure that you're better. At the end of the day, the only thing that matters is that you are more secure than you were when we started the test. But when you do that, when you start out with some dirty pool, then we're like, all right, gloves off, let's go. So we also have purple teams. The key to purple team is in the name. Purple, red, and blue. I am red, I'm the attacker. You, the system administrator and defenders, you're the blue team. We work together, that's purple. Because there's people, we're working together as a group, it's a team, purple team. You can't have a purple team that's like one person. It doesn't work. Got to have people involved. It has to have red and blue. These tests are very often like focused on emulating a specific attacker or a specific attack chain, or some other agreed upon scenario. I keep looking at this piece of paper thinking it's my slides, and I'm like, but that's not the right information. It's over there. So we agree ahead of time on like what the goals are, the specific objectives, and maybe it's we want to test detections for these particular MITRE attack techniques, or maybe we want to make sure that we've got, you've implemented these types of alerts, like Kerber roasting and password spraying and who knows whatever. You tell me the things that you want to test during that time period. We're going to make sure that we design a test to make those mark those checkboxes and make sure that you're getting that out of that. And then if we can be more collaborative and work on other things during that time, great. Purple teams are designed really to test assumptions. Like, we can detect Kerber roasting. Okay, let's prove that. What's your threshold for detecting Kerber roasting? Oh, if someone does 5 service ticket requests in a 5-minute period. Okay, what if I do 1 every 10? I can still pull all of the tickets over time and password crack those, but I've stayed below your alert threshold. If your detection mechanism is specifically on time in a period and we don't exceed that threshold, you don't detect it. So you have other mechanisms for being able to detect it. Oh, we can detect password spraying. How many failed accounts in what period? Like, where's the detection mechanism for that? Try to figure out what those objectives are. And we want to test those assumptions to make sure that you can actually detect this, and that we test your processes to validate that your processes are working. You've invested money to buy a SIEM, and you've invested resources to build alerts and dashboards so you have that information, let's make sure, let's validate your investment. And if you're not seeing those things, let's collaboratively work together, figure out, okay, you didn't get it. I'm going to give you time to retool your detection while I go over here and do some other work, and then we're going to meet back here in an hour and we're going to rerun this test to make sure that that's working. We identify gaps in visibility in purple teams, and we identify gaps in processes. So I talked about that team that didn't kick us out. They didn't terminate the VPN access. That's something that purple team's really good for. Like, let's run through your playbook and make sure that it works. And instead of like a tabletop where you just talk about it, you actually put that into action in a purple team. On the pro side of a purple team, we can confirm detections. We can confirm our defenses work. You can confirm, you can see my attacks. I'm not trying to do them in as evasive a manner as I would be if I was trying to hide from you. These tests are very collaborative. We find they're a lot of fun for both me as a tester and my team and our clients. We get to work together, really. It's very interactive. Downside of these tests, again, not focused on vulnerabilities. 2, how much time can you dedicate for your team? Like, if you can't dedicate a lot of time for your defenders to be involved in this test, you're not going to get the value out of the purple team, because the value comes from us working together. So you need to be able to give your team time to do the interaction. When you're doing these tests, not necessarily focused on the extent to which we can spread. Like, hey, can you detect lateral movement? But, okay, you can detect lateral movement or you can't detect lateral movement, but we're not trying to see how far we can go with that lateral movement, because like, we're going to try the lateral movement, but then there's other techniques that we need to tick off that you're wanting to test, instead of being like assume breach was like, where can we go with this access? So you may or may not be able to detect lateral movement, but we're not seeing what's the impact of that lateral movement, because it's a different kind of test. So the other thing, obviously, blue team might actually need to respond to vulnerabilities. I've been in the middle of these tests when they're like, aha, I see you doing whatever. And I was like, actually, I'm updating the report. I'm not doing anything. And they're like, oh, crap. That's a real alert. Someone's really actually trying to get code execution on our network. We have to go solve that problem. And now they're busy solving that problem and not working on the purple team. So that can happen. So what is the better way? If I think traditional network pen testing is broken, I will preface this again by saying, if you're doing, this doesn't include external network testing, right? Like, you should still be doing external network testing. Do you have a hard perimeter? Making sure that that's good. But I think that assume breach is the better way. I think that's the better way for most clients. It's the best bang for the buck. These tests have generally 2-ish kind of models. One, there's a compromised user who has clicked on a payload or has given up their credentials. What is the impact of that? There's also the malicious insider, someone who is an employee or a subcontractor is upset about their situation. A threat actor has decided to offer them money to give internal access. What happens with that? And they play out a little bit differently. If we're going with a compromised user, probably going to see what happens when a user executes a custom payload. So we're going to make sure that we can establish C2, that we can get around your EDR, we can establish command and control, and then see where we can go with that. The other option is kind of like the malicious user option. Let's start with a workstation with all of our controls on it and just see what we can do with that workstation. Not necessarily try to get C2 established, just see where can we go and what can we do with this machine. Both approaches are valid, and we will work with you, when you come to us to figure out which approach we should use with you, because it depends on what your goals are. So I will tell you what I think is the right thing, but really I will come to that information, I'll come to that decision about what I think is the best approach for you by finding out what it is that you want out of this and why why it is that you want that. Make sure that you're making the right choice. Should AV or EDR be disabled at the start of the test? How many think it should be enabled? How many think it should be disabled? How many think you should ask the client what their goals are? Trick question. Yeah. So a lot of the times, there were a few hands for raising hands for disabling EDR, which I think is a discussion you need to have. And usually the discussion is like, all right, we're going to start the test Monday morning. If we do not have code execution by 10 a.m. on Tuesday, let's allow this payload to run. Either allow this payload or turn off EDR AV on the initial access host. Only on the initial access workstation, not network-wide. And the reason I say that is because if the test is an assumed breach test and to see what is the impact of a compromised endpoint, if we're not going to disable EDR and you want me to continue fighting that, because as much as I like to say that I'm pretty good at EDR bypass, some days CrowdStrike or SentinelOne or whoever is better. And I might have a working bypass on Friday night. At the end of the day, I'm like, I'm done testing, great, I'm good to go. Over the weekend, they push an update. Monday morning, boom, punched in the face. I don't have a bypass. Do you want to pay me to develop a bypass for CrowdStrike or whatever EDR when we can all agree that given time it's going to be possible to bypass it? Or would you rather disable it or allow my payload to run at least and then see where it goes? And both of those are valid approaches, but this needs to be an informed decision. Why are you making that decision? And I'm going to try to guide you through that. So it's time to buy. So you now are the client, and you want to buy services from me. You want to buy services from TrustedSec, Black Hills, Company XYZ. Before you do this, there are questions that you should be asking yourself so that you are informed, that you understand why do I want what I think I want, to make sure you're getting the right thing. Are your goals to test detections and make sure that the controls that you have implemented are done properly? Do you want to find as many misconfigurations as possible? Do you want to make sure that you're doing patching correctly and that your systems are patched? Or maybe you've got good asset inventory. Maybe you want to see what an attacker can access if they do compromise systems. Are you just looking for a compliance checkmark? Some people are just looking for the compliance checkmark. Those are all questions that you should be asking. What is it that you want to get out of this test? Not just like, oh, we've got an annual requirement to have a test. What kind of test is going to be of value to you? Like, let's not just spend the money to do the test. Let's do something that is valuable to you. But what is your budget? You know, we don't ask you what your budget is so we can get you to spend as much money as possible. Like, ideally, you spend more money with us, right? Like, that's good for me. That's good for me. It keeps me in business. But at the end of the day, my job is to make sure you are more secure and better off than you were before the test started. And whatever I can do to make sure that's possible. So we will design the test appropriately to get the right test with the budget that you have available. And then, you know, how much time can you dedicate to this? If you're really busy, you're a limited staff, Purple Team might be really appealing, but you may not have the time that you can dedicate to that staff. Now, how much time do you need for a Purple Team? Depends. Like, it's not 8 hours a day for 5 days if you're doing a 5-day assessment. It's probably 4 days on site. You probably want to dedicate 4 hours of your analyst time to the Purple Team and 4 hours for other activities, right? So you can give time, like, let's do a couple hours of meetings, or a couple hours working together, and then go back and take care of email and whatever's happening, and let's meet again, and let's do another 2 hours, and then 2 hours, something like that. That's a good way to structure it. But you should have an answer. How much time can you dedicate to that? You should also ask yourself, realistically, where are you at in your maturity model? So if you have never had a pen test before, like you've never done a pen test, you're probably over here. The testing that you want to do is like an external test and internal. Make sure you're hardened on the outside. Make sure that you've done the things you need to do on the inside. On an internal pen test, we're going to do scans. We're going to discover all your assets. We're going to find where those assets are at, make sure that they're patched, make sure that they're not vulnerable. But after you've done that for a few years, it doesn't take a lot of time. I've taken a customer that had never had a pen test to the third year doing a pretty good job of punching me in the face on an assumed breach. They did 2 years of internal and external testing. They really committed to their security program, and by a third year, we were doing assumed breach, and they were doing really good. But you probably want to start with the combination of external and internal testing. If you have had some level of maturity in your program and your patching, and you got a pretty good handle on your asset inventory, and you think that you're in a pretty good place, the probably most value for you is the assumed breach. I think that for the vast majority of my customers, assumed breach is the right model. If you are a very, very mature organization and you have a large budget, the red team or adversary simulation, I think is kind of like the final master's thesis of your security program. Like you've done all the work, maybe it's your doctoral thesis really, like you've done all the work and you're validating that your program is solid. But for most clients, like you don't need a red team. Like they get the red team because an executive probably, executive went to a conference, heard some vendor talking about red team, and be like, that sounds sexy, we should do a red team. We have to do a red team. Be like, why? Because my CFO or my CTO or my C whatever or VP said we need to do a red team. And that happens quite a bit. And be like, well, we could say that this is a red-informed assumed breach. How about that? Let's do an assumed breach with a kind of more red tint to it. Be like, maybe we can do that. We'll call it a red team, but in the statement of work it says assumed breach. Like if we had to do that, we would do that. But what I really getting at is that I want you to know that as much as I would love you to spend the money on the red team, because that, like if you're hiring me, that's more money for me. But I don't care who you hire, I want to make sure that you're doing the thing that's going to help you out. And I think that the assumed breach is a better value for the vast majority of my clients, that is the right test for them. So I would encourage you to think about why you want the testing you think you might want and what you want to get out of that. So that's me. If you have questions, you want to talk afterwards, I've got a booth way back corner of the room over there. I'm Mike at redsiege.com. I'm Hardwater Hacker on Twitter. Follow the Red Siege Twitter account if you want to find out about talks that we're doing and new webcasts and blogs that we have coming out. There's my LinkedIn. If you want a copy of these slides, you can get them at redsiege.com/rethink, so you can download a copy of the slides. Other two things I'd love to tell you about, we've got a Discord that I think is a great community. I've had a number of people who are getting active, getting into the industry, and they said that they found our Discord to be like a great resource. Like it's been helpful for them. We have something called the Wednesday Offensive. Happens every Wednesday, 12:30 Central Time. Starts pre-show banter about 12:20. We start promptly at 12:30 with the presenter, and we end promptly at the top of the hour. And we have people who are doing interesting things in the offensive security space. Sometimes we have people who are doing really interesting things in the defensive security space, like Amanda Berlin and Lit Moose and the folks from Lima Charlie and things like that, coming and tell us what are the cool things that they're seeing from a defense side of things. Like how are they, new techniques that they have for defending their networks or new analyses of threat actors. It's 30 minutes, no BS, no slides, just come in, tell us the goods. It's interactive, ask questions if you want. You can come off mute and ask a question, you can type it in the chat. We have people tell us all the time that it's a great resource for them, a great way to learn and be involved and interactive. So I'm not just telling you to come because it's a Red Siege thing. Like, we have a lot of people that are involved that aren't with Red Siege. And there are people who you might consider were our direct competitors. Like, we've got people from Trusted Sec coming on and talking all the time, and Black Hills and other companies. And we do that because it's a huge space, and there's a lot of companies out there that you can hire, and there's a lot of smart people. And we just want people to be better. Like, I want you to be better. Hopefully you get better by coming and working with me, but at the end of the day, I just want you to make good decisions and be more secure than you were the day before. So that's why I'm here. Very happy to be talking to you today. If you have questions, again, we'll take some questions right now. We got a few minutes. Otherwise, you can find me back there at the table next to the, what are they, IX? IX, yeah. Next to IX, I'm standing next to them. And I love to chat about security. So if you're local and you want to get together for lunch and chat about security problems, hit me up. I'm here.
Does anyone have any questions? Not one? Not one question.
I don't believe it.
I don't either. Going once? Twice? Okay.
All right, well, if you're bashful, I'll be back there.
You've done everything you could, Mike. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
And Vision.